A millionaire and a homeless woman cross paths by pure chance. But what unfolds next will reveal a shocking secret, save a life, and change their destinies forever. You won't believe the twist. Olivia Carter didn't seem to care about the world anymore. She wandered through the streets of New York like a ghost, invisible to the hurried eyes that passed her by. Every corner held a story, every alley a memory she preferred to forget. The city that once witnessed her triumphs now seemed to punish her. The weight of her past reminded her every single day of the mistake that brought her to this point. How could she forgive herself for failing to save a life? The nights were long and cold, and Olivia sought shelter wherever she could. A random awning offered some relief from the biting wind but couldn't shield her from the voices in her mind. The screams of that fateful day still echoed, blending with the distant sound of sirens. Every coin she begged for came with looks of pity or disdain, but she was used to being ignored. What people didn't know was that Olivia had once been the one rushing to save lives. Now, she could barely save herself. Elsewhere in the city, Joe Moore lived the opposite life, or so it seemed. He was a millionaire, but his fortune couldn't fill the void he felt. A renowned businessman, he managed an empire that seemed endless, but his heart was constantly in debt. Since his sister's death, he had been raising his niece, Mary, an 11-year-old girl with big, curious eyes that hid her own pain. Joe tried to keep everything under control, but the truth was that the weight of responsibility was crushing him. Joe worked late, often ignoring medical advice about his burnout. He knew he needed help but trusted no one but himself. Balancing his multi-million-dollar businesses while caring for Mary drained him completely. Mary, on the other hand, was a sweet child, but her congenital heart condition demanded constant attention. Between board meetings and hospital visits, Joe juggled being a businessman and a stand-in parent. Meanwhile, Olivia tried to forget what it meant to be needed. Every new scar on her heart pulled her further away from the person she once was. She avoided eye contact, conversations, and herself. Joe, surrounded by people, felt a loneliness as deep as Olivia's. They existed in opposite extremes but shared one feeling: guilt. Joe blamed himself for not being enough for Mary, and Olivia carried the weight of not being enough to save someone who had depended on her. Fate, however, has a peculiar way of working. While Olivia existed in apathy and Joe struggled to keep up appearances, their stories were already intertwined. They just didn't know it yet. In a city so large, chance encounters seemed impossible. But sometimes, it's in the most unlikely moments that life finds its strength. And when their lives collided, nothing would ever be the same again. The rain was light but relentless that night, drizzling over the dimly lit streets of New York. Olivia was used to the cold and wet by now, but something about the figure in the alley caught her attention. A man lay slumped against the wall, barely moving. Her instincts, those she'd tried so hard to bury, kicked in before she could think. She knelt beside him, checked his pulse, and called an ambulance with the practiced calm of someone who had done this countless times before. For a moment, she forgot about herself and focused only on keeping him alive. Joe Moore didn't remember collapsing. One moment, he had been walking to clear his head, trying to make sense of his spiraling life. The next, he woke up in a hospital bed, surrounded by the sterile beeping of machines. His memories of the night were blurry, but one image stood out: the face of a woman who had appeared out of nowhere to help him. She saved me, he thought, gratitude flooding him as he tried to piece together the events that led him there. Outside the hospital, Olivia stayed in the shadows, avoiding the questions she knew would come if she were recognized. Saving that man had been a reflex, a moment where she'd acted on instinct instead of fear. But now, as she watched him recover, the doubts and guilt returned like an old habit. She didn't belong in a place like this anymore. That part of her life was over. Or so she told herself. Weeks passed, and Joe resumed his routine, though something had shifted inside him. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had saved his life. She was a mystery, but one he felt compelled to unravel. Using resources only his wealth could provide, he tracked her down. When he finally found her, wandering the streets in worn-out clothes, he was stunned. The woman who had acted so decisively to save him was now barely holding herself together. Approaching her cautiously, Joe said, You saved my life. Let me help you." Olivia froze at his words, unsure whether to feel flattered, suspicious, or afraid. He insisted on his gratitude, but what surprised her more was his offer. He explained his situation. His niece, Mary, needed constant care due to her heart condition. "I need someone who can be there for her," he said. "Someone who knows how to handle emergencies." Olivia wasn't sure if he was being serious or just desperate. The idea seemed ludicrous to Olivia. She could barely take care of herself, and now this man was asking her to take care of a child? "You don't even know me," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. But Joe's expression didn't waver. He wasn't asking out of pity. "You're capable of more than you think," he said firmly, handing her a card with his contact information before walking away. Olivia spent days grappling with the offer. Every time she tried to dismiss it, Joe's words echoed in her mind. Could she really do it? The idea of being responsible for someone again terrified her, but it also stirred something she hadn't felt in years, a glimmer of purpose. But purpose came with risk, and she wasn't sure she was ready to take it. Joe, on the other hand, was certain she would say yes. Something about Olivia's presence during his collapse had stayed with him. She wasn't just someone who had helped him, she was someone who had faced her own struggles and survived. He didn't know her full story, but he had a feeling that bringing her into his life would change more than just Mary's future, it might change hers too. The decision hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. Olivia carried Joe's card in her pocket, turning it over again and again. She didn't want to admit it, but a part of her knew this wasn't just a job offer. It was something bigger, something that could either save her or break her completely. Olivia held the card in her hand, staring at it like it was some kind of trap. The man's offer, it didn't make any sense. Work as a caregiver for his niece? Look after a child? She could barely take care of herself, let alone someone else. The very thought of it made her stomach twist. How could someone like her, with all her failures and broken pieces, possibly help anyone? "He's making a mistake," she muttered under her breath. She tried to convince herself to forget about it. She stuffed the card into her pocket, determined to leave it there and never think about it again. But no matter how hard she tried, her mind kept circling back to his words, "You're capable of more than you think." Olivia didn't believe that for a second. The guilt she carried from her past weighed her down like an anchor, reminding her every day that she wasn't good enough. Not anymore. Meanwhile, Joe was quietly waiting for a response, though his patience was running thin. He had taken a chance on Olivia because he saw something in her, a strength she didn't seem to see in herself. But as the days stretched into weeks, even he started to doubt if she would ever call. "Maybe I pushed too hard," he admitted to himself one evening, pacing in his office. But deep down, he still believed Olivia could be exactly what Mary needed. Olivia, however, was trapped in her own mind. The thought of stepping into Joe's world felt impossible. Every time she imagined taking the job, doubts crept in like shadows. What if she failed again? What if she hurt Mary instead of helping her? Those questions replayed over and over, louder than the faint whisper of hope she tried to ignore. "I'm not ready," she told herself. "I'll never be ready." One night, she wandered aimlessly through the city, hoping to silence her thoughts. The streets were quiet, but her mind was anything but. Memories of her old life kept flashing before her eyes. The uniform she once wore with pride, the people she had helped, the life she had lost. She thought about the face of the man she couldn't save, the one whose life had slipped through her fingers. That failure haunted her every step. But now, another face lingered in her mind, Mary's. A child she hadn't even met, yet who had become a quiet presence in her thoughts. Joe, on the other hand, was trying to focus on keeping his own life together. Balancing his business and caring for Mary was already overwhelming, but Olivia's silence gnawed at him. He hated feeling helpless, but he knew he couldn't force her to take the job. All he could do was wait and hope she would see what he saw, a woman who had so much more to offer than she realized. But Olivia wasn't ready to see that yet. Every time she thought about calling Joe, fear stopped her. She felt as if the walls of her past were closing in, trapping her in the same cycle of regret and self-doubt. "I'm not the person he thinks I am," she whispered to herself. She wanted to believe she could change, But the idea of trying and failing again was too much to bear. The card stayed in her pocket, its edges worn from her fingers nervously fidgeting with it. She didn't throw it away, though. Something kept her from letting go entirely. Maybe it was the way Joe's voice had carried so much conviction when he spoke to her. Or maybe it was something deeper, something she wasn't ready to admit. The decision loomed over her like a storm cloud. She could feel it pressing down on her, waiting for her to act. But for now, all she could do was stand still, paralyzed by her fear. What she didn't know was that this moment of hesitation would set the stage for everything that came next. Joe Moore wasn't the kind of man who usually insisted on something once the answer seemed clear. But there was something about Olivia that made him unwilling to give up. Maybe it was the way she had looked that night in the alley, focused, capable, even as she tried to hide behind her own pain. Or maybe it was the way she disappeared after saving his life, as though she was running from something he couldn't quite understand. Whatever it was, he couldn't let it go. When Joe found her again, it was in a small, rundown diner. Olivia was sitting in the corner, her hands wrapped around a chipped coffee cup, looking like she was trying to disappear into the shadows. He approached cautiously, his movements measured, but there was determination in his eyes. "Can I sit here?" he asked. She didn't answer right away, but after a moment, she nodded, more out of resignation than agreement. Joe didn't waste time with pleasantries. He knew Olivia wasn't someone who would respond to small talk. Instead, he spoke with quiet honesty. "You saved my life," he said, his voice steady but soft. "I don't know why, and I don't know what you're going through, but I'm here because I think we can help each other." The simplicity of his words caught Olivia off guard. She had been expecting pity or awkward gratitude, but instead, Joe spoke like someone who truly understood what it meant to need help. She tried to push him away, at least verbally. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her tone sharp, defensive. But Joe didn't back down. "No, I don't," he admitted. "But I know what I saw that night. You didn't hesitate. You acted like someone who cares, someone who knows how to make a difference." His words were calm, but they hit her harder than she wanted to admit. Joe began to share his story. He talked about Mary, his niece, who had been living with him since his sister's death. He described her heart condition, the countless hospital visits, and the struggles of balancing his demanding job with being her sole caregiver. "She's strong," he said, his voice softening. "But she needs someone who can be there for her. Someone who knows how to handle tough situations." Olivia listened, even though she tried not to. There was something in his voice, a mix of desperation and hope, that made it impossible to ignore. "You're asking the wrong person," Olivia finally said, shaking her head. But Joe didn't flinch. "Maybe. Or maybe I see something in you that you've forgotten is there." His words lingered in the air between them. For a moment, Olivia didn't know what to say. She had spent so long believing she was broken, useless, that hearing someone speak about her potential felt almost foreign. Before he left, Joe handed her his business card again. "Think about it," he said simply. "No pressure. But I believe you could make a real difference, for her and for yourself." Then he stood, paid for her coffee without saying a word, and walked out of the diner. Olivia sat there for a long time, staring at the card, feeling a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. Over the next few days, Joe's words replayed in Olivia's mind. She hated how they made her feel, like there might still be a chance for her to matter, to help someone. She had spent years convincing herself otherwise, and now, one conversation had started to unravel everything she believed about herself. The idea of caring for Mary scared her, but it also sparked something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Joe, on the other hand, was certain he had done all he could. He didn't push her further, trusting that Olivia needed time to make her decision. But he hoped, deep down, that she would see what he saw: a woman capable of incredible strength, even if she didn't know it yet. For Olivia, the choice felt monumental. She wasn't just deciding whether to take a job, she was deciding whether she could face herself again, whether she could believe in her own worth. And though the answer wasn't clear yet, something inside her had begun to shift. It was late evening when Olivia finally dialed the number on Joe's card. Her hands trembled as she held the phone, and for a moment, she considered hanging up. But before she could, Joe's voice came through the line. "Olivia," he said, his tone calm but surprised. She froze for a second before managing a reply. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. On the other end, Joe didn't push or interrupt. He simply listened, his patience steady as ever. "I'll do it," Olivia finally said. The words felt heavier than she expected, like they carried more than just a decision. They carried a promise. The next morning, Olivia stood at the entrance to Joe's home, a towering mansion that looked more like a museum than a place where anyone actually lived. She hesitated before knocking, her heartbeat quickening. The door opened to reveal Joe, who smiled warmly. "Welcome," he said, stepping aside to let her in. Olivia glanced around, feeling like she didn't belong in a house so grand. The polished floors, high ceilings, and sparkling chandeliers were a sharp contrast to the streets she had been calling home. And then she saw Mary. The girl was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the living room, surrounded by coloring books and medical equipment. Her wide, curious eyes looked up at Olivia, studying her intently. "Is she the new babysitter?" Mary asked, her voice straightforward and unfiltered. Olivia didn't know how to respond at first. "I guess so," she said, a nervous smile tugging at her lips. Mary's gaze lingered for a moment longer before she shrugged and went back to her coloring. The first few days were awkward. Mary wasn't exactly welcoming, and Olivia wasn't sure how to navigate the new role she had taken on. Every interaction felt like a test. Mary would challenge her, pushing boundaries with a quiet defiance that Olivia couldn't blame her for. "I don't need anyone taking care of me," Mary declared during their first argument over bedtime. Olivia didn't argue back. Instead, she quietly adjusted Mary's pillows and sat by her bedside until she fell asleep. It wasn't about proving anything, it was about being present. Joe watched from a distance, giving Olivia space to adjust. He could see the effort she was making, even if she didn't realize it herself. For him, her presence was already making a difference. Mary, who had been guarded and distant for so long, was starting to open up in small, almost imperceptible ways. Joe didn't say anything to Olivia about it, but he felt more hopeful than he had in years. Olivia, however, still carried the weight of her doubts. Every time she walked into Mary's room, she was reminded of her past failures. The guilt and fear loomed over her like shadows, whispering that she wasn't good enough, that she would mess this up like she had before. But then Mary would say something unexpected, a simple thank you or a shy smile, and those shadows would fade, if only for a moment. One evening, as Olivia helped Mary with her homework, the girl asked a question that caught her off guard. "Why did you say yes?" Mary's voice was soft, almost hesitant, as though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Olivia paused, looking at Mary's earnest face. "Because sometimes," she began, choosing her words carefully, "you have to take a chance on something, even if you're scared." It was the first time Olivia had admitted her fear out loud, and saying it felt oddly freeing. As the days turned into weeks, Olivia found herself slowly adjusting to her new life. The mansion no longer felt as intimidating, and her bond with Mary, though fragile, began to grow. She started noticing small changes in herself, her confidence returning in quiet, unassuming ways. Helping Mary navigate her daily challenges reminded Olivia of the person she used to be, and for the first time in years, she started to wonder if she could be that person again. Joe saw the change too. He noticed how Olivia began to carry herself differently, how her laughter, quiet and rare, started to echo in the halls. He didn't say much, but his approval was evident in the way he trusted her more each day. Olivia wasn't just crossing a threshold into a new job, she was stepping into a version of herself she thought was long gone. Still, there was an unspoken tension in the air. Olivia's progress was real, but the weight of her past wasn't something that could be shaken off easily. She was rebuilding herself, piece by piece, but she knew it wouldn't be without challenges. What she didn't realize was that the hardest part of her journey was yet to come. The days turned into weeks, and Olivia found herself settling into a rhythm at Joe's house. But it wasn't without its challenges. Mary, though curious about her new caregiver, was still guarded. She tested Olivia in subtle, sometimes frustrating ways. One evening, Mary refused to take her medication, crossing her arms defiantly. "I don't need it. I'm fine," she declared. Olivia knelt beside her, her voice steady but gentle. "I know it's hard, but you're stronger than this. And I'll be right here every step of the way." Slowly, Mary relented, though her gaze lingered on Olivia, as if assessing whether she truly meant her words. Joe, meanwhile, was juggling his own battles. His demanding work schedule didn't let up, and the weight of managing his business and Mary's care often left him exhausted. Still, he watched Olivia with a mix of admiration and relief. She was proving to be more than capable, though he could see the toll it was taking on her. "You don't have to do everything," he told her one night as they cleaned up after dinner. Olivia just shook her head. "Neither do you," she replied, her tone softer than he expected. Despite the growing bond between Olivia and Mary, there were moments of doubt. Olivia still carried the scars of her past, and every time Mary pushed her boundaries, those old fears crept back in. "What if I fail her?" Olivia confided in Joe one evening after Mary had gone to bed. Joe leaned against the kitchen counter, his expression serious but kind. "We all fail sometimes," he said. "What matters is that you're here. That you're trying." His words stayed with Olivia long after the conversation ended. Mary, too, faced her own struggles. Her condition often left her feeling frustrated and isolated, and she didn't always know how to express it. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult doctor's appointment, she lashed out. "Why do I have to be the sick one?" she shouted, tears streaming down her face. Olivia didn't try to offer platitudes. Instead, she sat beside Mary and let her cry, holding her hand until the storm passed. "It's not fair," Olivia admitted quietly. "But you're not alone in this." Outside the house, Joe was dealing with pressures of a different kind. Investors were questioning his focus, and distant family members were criticizing his decision to bring Olivia into their lives. "You don't even know her," one of them said during a tense phone call. But Joe stood firm. "I know enough to trust her," he replied, though even he couldn't fully explain why he felt so certain. All he knew was that Olivia had become an integral part of their world. Olivia's confidence grew in small but meaningful ways. She started taking the lead in Mary's care, from organizing her medical appointments to helping her find ways to enjoy everyday moments. One afternoon, she surprised Mary with a small art set. "I thought you might like to try painting," she said, her voice tentative. Mary's eyes lit up, and for the first time, Olivia saw a spark of genuine excitement. "Thanks," Mary said softly, her walls beginning to crack. Even with these moments of connection, Olivia still faced her inner demons. The memories of her past haunted her, whispering that she wasn't good enough, that she would let Mary down like she had before. But each time those thoughts surfaced, something, or someone, pulled her back. Whether it was Mary's hesitant smile or Joe's quiet encouragement, Olivia found reasons to keep going, one step at a time. The bond between Olivia, Joe, and Mary continued to deepen. They began to feel like a team, each bringing something essential to their fragile little family. Olivia started to see glimpses of her old self, the competent, compassionate person she thought she had lost. And though she wasn't fully healed, she was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could make a difference. But the challenges weren't over. Olivia could sense that something bigger was coming, something that would test everything they had built together. For now, though, she focused on the present, on the small victories that made each day a little brighter. What she didn't know was that the most difficult test was just around the corner. The news hit like a thunderclap. Mary's condition had worsened. During a routine checkup, the doctor's expression grew grave as he explained the situation. "Her heart can't keep up much longer," he said. "She needs a transplant, and soon." The words hung heavy in the air. Joe sat silently, his hands gripping the edge of his chair. Olivia, standing beside him, felt the weight of the doctor's words settle deep in her chest. For Mary, time was running out, and every second felt like it was slipping away too fast. The drive home from the hospital was quiet, the kind of silence that carried unspoken fears. Mary, sitting in the back seat, seemed calm, almost too calm. Olivia glanced at her through the rearview mirror, wondering what thoughts were swirling in her mind. "It's going to be okay," Olivia said softly, though the words felt hollow. Mary didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the passing buildings, her small hands clasped tightly in her lap. Back at the house, Joe tried to take control, throwing himself into action. He spent hours on calls, contacting specialists, researching transplant options, and speaking to every connection he had. The waiting list for a compatible donor was long, and the odds weren't in their favor. Olivia watched him from a distance, seeing the desperation behind his composed exterior. She wanted to help, but what could she do? Her presence felt insignificant in the face of something so immense. Mary, however, seemed oddly at peace with the situation. One evening, as Olivia helped her get ready for bed, the girl spoke up. "If I don't get the transplant, it's okay," she said quietly. Olivia froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Don't say that," she replied, kneeling beside Mary. "We're going to find a way. I promise." But Mary just gave her a small, knowing smile, as if she had made peace with something Olivia couldn't yet understand. Then came the unexpected news. During a routine blood test, the doctors discovered that Olivia was a compatible match for Mary. It was a coincidence so improbable that it felt almost impossible. When Joe told her, Olivia could barely process the information. "What?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Joe's expression was a mixture of relief and worry. "You're a match, Olivia. You can save her." The words were simple, but the implications were anything but. That night, Olivia lay awake, staring at the ceiling as her mind raced. The decision seemed clear on the surface. She could save Mary's life. But the risks were enormous. The procedure could leave her with complications, or worse, cost her own life. And beneath the fear of the surgery was something deeper, a voice telling her she wasn't worthy of being Mary's savior. "What if I fail again?" she whispered into the dark. Joe tried to reassure her, but even he couldn't hide his concerns. "You don't have to do this," he told her one evening, his voice heavy with emotion. "We'll keep looking for another option." But Olivia could see the conflict in his eyes. He didn't want to pressure her, but they both knew how slim the chances were of finding another donor in time. "I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice breaking. "What if I'm not strong enough?" The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Mary remained unaware of Olivia's compatibility, and Olivia struggled with the weight of her decision. She tried to imagine a world where she could walk away, where she could refuse the surgery and let someone else take responsibility. But every time she looked at Mary, her wide, hopeful eyes and quiet resilience, she knew that walking away wasn't an option she could live with. The moment of decision loomed closer, like a storm building on the horizon. Olivia could feel it pressing down on her, forcing her to confront not only her fears but also her past. Saving Mary wasn't just about the surgery, it was about proving to herself that she was more than her failures, more than her mistakes. But the question remained, was she ready to take that leap? As Olivia sat alone in the quiet of the night, the house around her still and silent, she realized that the choice wasn't just about Mary. It was about who Olivia wanted to be. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear, she couldn't run from this. Not anymore. The hospital room was cold, the fluorescent lights casting an unflattering glow on the polished floors. Olivia lay on the operating table, staring at the ceiling as nurses moved around her, preparing for the surgery. The words of the surgeon echoed in her mind. "It's a risky procedure. There are no guarantees." She had nodded, barely able to find her voice. Now, as the anesthesiologist approached, she closed her eyes, trying to push past the fear. This wasn't just about saving Mary, it was about redeeming herself. In the waiting area, Joe paced back and forth, his hands gripping the phone he wasn't even using. Every few minutes, he'd glance at the door leading to the operating rooms, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. He had begged Olivia to reconsider, to give herself more time to decide. But her answer had been resolute. "I need to do this," she'd said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her eyes. Now, all he could do was wait and hope. Mary was in the adjacent operating room, unaware of the lengths Olivia was going to save her. She had been nervous earlier but tried to hide it behind a brave face. "It's just like a really long nap, right?" she'd asked Joe, who had knelt beside her bed, holding her small hand in his. "That's right," he had replied, forcing a smile. But now, alone in the waiting room, that facade crumbled. He felt powerless, a feeling he had spent his whole life avoiding. The hours dragged on, each second a battle against the unknown. Joe's mind oscillated between hope and despair. He couldn't lose Mary. But the thought of losing Olivia, too, it was unbearable. She had become more than just Mary's caregiver. She was a part of their family, someone who had brought light back into their lives when they needed it most. "Come on, Olivia," he whispered under his breath. "You're stronger than this." Inside the operating room, the surgeons worked tirelessly. Mary's transplant was progressing smoothly, her new heart taking its first tentative beats. In Olivia's room, however, things were more precarious. Complications arose, and the steady hum of monitors filled the air with urgency. Olivia's body was struggling to keep up, her heart rate erratic. The lead surgeon issued commands in rapid succession, his tone tense but controlled. It was a fight to keep her alive. Joe's thoughts were interrupted by a nurse who emerged from the operating area. He stood abruptly, his pulse racing. "Mary's surgery went well," she said with a small, reassuring smile. Relief washed over him like a tidal wave, and for a brief moment he felt weightless. "Can I see her?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Soon," the nurse replied. "But Olivia's condition is critical. We're doing everything we can." The news hit Joe like a physical blow. He sank into the nearest chair, his hands gripping his knees as he fought to process it. Mary was safe for now. But Olivia, the woman who had risked everything to give his niece another chance at life, was hanging by a thread. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. "She's a fighter," he told himself, clinging to that belief like a lifeline. "She's going to make it." Hours passed, each one heavier than the last. Joe finally got to see Mary, who was still groggy but stable. Her first question was about Olivia. "Is she okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Joe hesitated, his heart aching at the worry in her eyes. "She's still in surgery," he said gently. "But she's strong. Just like you." Mary nodded, though her expression remained troubled. Even at her age, she could sense the weight of the situation. Meanwhile, Olivia's condition worsened. The medical team pushed harder, trying to stabilize her as her vitals fluctuated dangerously. It was as if her body was caught between two worlds, refusing to give up but struggling to stay. In the depths of unconsciousness, Olivia's mind swirled with memories, her failures, her guilt, and the faces of the people she had saved. And then, Mary's face appeared, clear and bright, accompanied by a simple thought: "This is why I'm here." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the monitors began to stabilize. The lead surgeon sighed with relief as Olivia's heartbeat grew stronger. It wasn't over yet, her recovery would be long and uncertain. But for now, she was alive. The battle wasn't won, but it wasn't lost either. In the waiting room, Joe received the news with cautious hope. Olivia was in critical condition, but she had made it through the surgery. He closed his eyes, murmuring a silent thank you. As he sat back, exhausted but resolute, he realized that this was only the beginning of another battle, for Olivia's recovery and for the life they all wanted to rebuild together. The first signs of hope came 2 weeks after the surgery. Olivia remained in critical condition, her body frail and surrounded by machines that hummed and beeped constantly. Joe visited her every day, sitting by her bedside and talking to her as if she could hear him. "Mary's doing great," he said one afternoon, his voice cracking with emotion. "She's asking for you. She misses you." He squeezed her hand gently, hoping for any kind of response. Mary, now recovering in the pediatric wing, was flourishing in ways no one had anticipated. Her color had returned, her energy slowly building. Every doctor who saw her commented on how well she was healing. "She's a fighter," they said, but Mary gave all the credit to Olivia. "She's the real hero," she told anyone who would listen. "She gave me her heart so I could keep mine." Joe juggled his time between Mary and Olivia, carrying the weight of gratitude and worry. During one of his visits to Olivia's room, a nurse handed him a file. "You should see this," she said quietly. It was a report from a private investigator Joe had hired weeks before. Inside were documents confirming a truth he hadn't expected. Olivia was his half-sister, the result of a long-hidden affair his father had once had. Joe's breath caught as he read the details. "We're family," he whispered, the words settling heavily in his chest. At first, Joe didn't know what to do with the information. Should he tell her? Would it change anything? As he sat by her bedside that evening, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, he realized it didn't matter. Blood ties or not, Olivia was already family. She had given everything for Mary, and that bond was stronger than any paperwork. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that she deserved to know the truth. And then, one morning, Olivia opened her eyes. The nurse had just finished her rounds when she noticed a faint flicker of movement. "She's awake," she called out, and soon the room was filled with quiet commotion. Joe rushed to her side, his heart pounding as he saw her blinking slowly, trying to focus. "Olivia," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You're back." Her recovery was slow and cautious, but every small step forward felt like a miracle. Olivia listened as Joe told her about Mary's progress, the way she was starting to live like a normal kid again. "You did this," he said, his tone filled with pride. Olivia, still weak, managed a small smile. "She's stronger than I am," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. But Joe shook his head. "No, Olivia. You're stronger than you know." As her strength returned, Joe decided it was time to tell her the truth. Sitting beside her, he held the investigator's file in his lap, hesitating before he spoke. "Olivia, there's something you need to know," he began, his voice careful. "We're family. Half-siblings." For a moment, Olivia stared at him, her expression unreadable. "Family," she finally repeated, the words sounding foreign on her tongue. Joe nodded, his gaze steady. "It doesn't change anything," he added quickly. "But it felt important to tell you." Olivia processed the revelation slowly, her emotions a mix of surprise, confusion, and a strange sense of relief. "I always felt like I didn't belong anywhere," she admitted. "But maybe this makes sense?" Joe smiled gently, his hand resting on hers. "You've always belonged," he said simply. "We just didn't know it yet." The bond between them deepened as Olivia continued to heal. Mary, now fully aware of what Olivia had done for her, visited often, bringing drawings and small gifts. "You're my hero," she told Olivia one afternoon, her voice full of sincerity. Olivia, moved to tears, reached out to hold Mary's hand. "You're mine too," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion. As the weeks went on, Olivia began to regain her strength, both physically and emotionally. The revelation of her connection to Joe gave her a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't just someone who had been lost and broken, she was part of a family now. And more than that, she had a purpose. She had saved Mary, but in many ways, Mary and Joe had saved her too. The moments of recovery were bittersweet, filled with gratitude and a new sense of possibility. Olivia wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. And though the path ahead wasn't without its challenges, she knew she wouldn't have to face it alone. The house felt different now. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was a symbol of survival, of second chances, and of the family that had been forged in the hardest of circumstances. Olivia sat on the porch one evening, the cool breeze brushing her face as she watched Mary playing in the garden. The sight of her running freely, her laughter echoing through the air, filled Olivia with a sense of pride she couldn't quite put into words. This was why she had done it. This was what made it all worth it. Joe joined her on the porch, 2 mugs of tea in his hands. He passed one to Olivia, sitting down beside her with a quiet sigh. "She's unstoppable now," he said, nodding toward Mary. Olivia chuckled softly. "She always was," she replied, her voice warm with affection. There was an ease between them now, a shared understanding that didn't need words. They had been through so much together, and somehow, they had come out stronger. As the weeks turned into months, Olivia found herself adjusting to her new life. She started helping Joe turn his house into something more than just a mansion. It became a sanctuary. Together, they began building the foundation of what would soon be called Correcos Valentes, a center dedicated to helping families facing medical and emotional crises. This place could be a lifeline for so many, Joe said one evening as they planned renovations. Olivia nodded, her heart swelling with purpose. It's exactly what we needed back then, she said quietly. Mary, now full of energy and curiosity, took an active role in the project. She loved helping with small tasks, from organizing supplies to giving input on the children's play area. We should have a big art wall, she suggested one day, her eyes lighting up with excitement. So everyone can leave something behind. Olivia and Joe exchanged a look, both silently agreeing that Mary's enthusiasm was contagious. I think that's a perfect idea, Olivia said with a smile. Despite the progress they were making, Olivia still had moments of doubt. The scars from her past didn't disappear overnight, and there were days when the weight of everything she had been through felt overwhelming. But those moments were fleeting now, replaced by a growing sense of hope. Whenever the darkness crept in, she would look at Mary or talk to Joe, and the warmth of their connection would pull her back. You're not alone anymore, Joe reminded her one evening, his words steady and reassuring. The community began to take notice of their efforts. Families who had once faced impossible odds came to the center seeking solace and support. Olivia took the lead in organizing group meetings, sharing her own story when it felt right. At first, it was terrifying, bearing her vulnerabilities to strangers, but the impact was undeniable. You're helping more people than you realize, Joe told her after one particularly emotional session. Olivia smiled, her confidence growing little by little. Mary's progress continued to amaze everyone around her. She started attending school again, making friends and living the kind of life she had always dreamed of. But she never forgot what Olivia had done for her. One night, as they were getting ready for bed, Mary sat beside Olivia and took her hand. You gave me my life back, she said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. Olivia felt tears sting her eyes as she replied, and you gave me mine. As the center grew, so did their vision for the future. Joe began reaching out to other communities, sharing the idea of Carracos Valentes and how it could be replicated in other places. Olivia, who had once thought her life was over, found herself dreaming again. What if we could help even more families? She asked Joe one evening, her voice filled with possibility. Then let's do it, he replied, his determination matching hers. The road back wasn't easy, but it was filled with purpose. Olivia, Joe, and Mary weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving. They had created something beautiful out of their pain, something that could inspire others to find strength in their darkest moments. And as they stood together on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, they knew that this was only the beginning of the life they were building together. Olivia Carter had spent years feeling like a shadow of her former self, but standing in the middle of the bustling Carracos Valentes Center, she felt truly alive for the first time. The halls were filled with laughter, chatter, and the kind of energy she once thought she would never experience again. Families moved through the spaces they had created, finding solace in one another, and Olivia watched it all with a mixture of pride and disbelief. This wasn't just a building, it was proof that even the darkest stories could have bright new chapters. Her recovery had been slow and filled with uncertainty, but Olivia had fought through every step. The physical scars were reminders of the surgery, but the emotional healing had been even more profound. She no longer avoided mirrors, no longer saw failure in her reflection. Instead, she saw resilience, strength, and a woman who had faced her worst fears and come out stronger. She had found a purpose that gave her a reason to keep moving forward, even on the hardest days. Mary, now the picture of health, was a constant reminder of what Olivia had gained through her sacrifice. Every time the girl smiled or shared a story about her day at school, Olivia felt a surge of joy. Mary often stayed by Olivia's side at the center, helping organize activities or simply offering her bright, infectious energy to everyone she met. You saved me, Mary said one afternoon as they worked on an art project together. Olivia paused, looking at her thoughtfully. No, she replied softly. You saved me. Joe, too, had transformed. He no longer carried the heavy, isolated demeanor he had when Olivia first met him. Instead, he radiated a quiet confidence and warmth, qualities that had deepened through their shared journey. He watched Olivia with a kind of awe, marveling at how far she had come. "You're the heart of this place," he told her one evening as they walked through the center after hours. Olivia shook her head with a small smile. "No, we all are," she replied. And in that moment, Joe realized she was right. Despite the progress, Olivia knew that healing wasn't a straight path. There were still nights when the ghosts of her past would creep in, whispering doubts and fears. But now, she faced them differently. She had Mary's laughter, Joe's steady support, and the tangible proof of the lives she was helping to change. Those things were stronger than any shadow, and they gave her the courage to keep going. "I'm not that person anymore," she would remind herself. And for the first time, she believed it. As the center gained recognition, Olivia began sharing her story more openly. She spoke at events, giving hope to families who were struggling with their own challenges. At first, she had been hesitant, unsure if her words would matter. But every time someone approached her after a speech to thank her, to say that her journey had inspired them, she felt a piece of herself grow stronger. "You're changing lives," Joe told her after one particularly moving event. Olivia smiled, her heart full. "That's the goal," she replied. Mary's recovery became a beacon of hope for everyone at the center. She was living proof that miracles were possible, that sacrifice and love could overcome even the most daunting odds. "You're unstoppable now," Olivia teased her one day as they played in the garden. Mary laughed, her voice ringing out like music. "I had a good teacher," she replied. It was moments like these that reminded Olivia why she had made the choices she had. The bond between Olivia, Joe, and Mary deepened with each passing day. They weren't just a makeshift family anymore. They were a team, united by their shared experiences and the love they had found in one another. They celebrated small victories together, supported each other through setbacks, and always looked ahead to what they could build next. Olivia had once thought she didn't deserve this kind of connection, but now, she couldn't imagine life without it. As Olivia stood at the front of the center one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant colors, she felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She had faced death, grief, and the deepest kind of guilt, and she had come out the other side. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. And in that moment, she realized that the person she had been before wasn't lost. She had been waiting all along, waiting to be reborn as someone even stronger. The grand opening of the fully realized Correcos Valentes Center was a day filled with emotion and hope. Families, friends, and even strangers who had heard their story gathered to celebrate the beginning of something extraordinary. Olivia stood at the entrance, watching as children ran through the halls and parents found a place where they could finally breathe. The once imposing mansion had been transformed into a sanctuary of warmth and compassion. For Olivia, it was more than just a building. It was the physical manifestation of everything they had fought for. Joe stepped beside her, his expression a mix of pride and gratitude. "Look at what you've built," he said, his voice soft but full of admiration. Olivia smiled, shaking her head. "What we've built," she corrected, glancing over at Mary, who was eagerly showing another child the new art wall she had designed. The words etched into the plaque at the entrance said it all: a place for hearts to heal and grow. Mary had become the heart and soul of the center, her energy and enthusiasm infecting everyone around her. She took her role as a symbol of hope seriously, sharing her story with kids who felt scared or uncertain about their futures. "It's okay to be scared," she told one boy who hesitated to join a group activity. "I was scared too, but look at me now." Her openness and bravery reminded Olivia every day why she had made the sacrifices she did. The center's impact rippled outwards, attracting attention from media outlets and other communities. Olivia found herself at the forefront of this growing movement, speaking at events and sharing the journey that had brought them here. Her speeches weren't polished or rehearsed, but they resonated deeply with everyone who heard them. "We built this place because we know what it's like to feel lost," she said during one presentation. "And we're here to remind you that no one is ever truly alone." Joe took on the role of strategist and advocate, using his business acumen to secure funding and expand the center's reach. He was no longer the stoic, overworked businessman Olivia had met months ago. He had found a purpose that went beyond profits and boardrooms. Watching Olivia lead with such courage and grace inspired him to give more of himself to the cause. "You're the spark, Olivia," he told her one evening after a successful fundraising event. "None of this happens without you." For Olivia, the journey was deeply personal. Every family that walked through the doors reminded her of her own struggles, her own moments of despair. She made it her mission to know each person's name, to hear their stories, and to let them know they mattered. "You're not just a patient here," she told one mother who had brought her son for support. "You're part of this family now." It was the same sentiment Joe and Mary had given her when she needed it most. Mary's health continued to improve, and with every milestone she achieved, Olivia felt a renewed sense of purpose. The girl's zest for life was infectious, and her bond with Olivia grew stronger every day. One evening, as they sat in the garden watching the stars, Mary rested her head on Olivia's shoulder. "I'm going to help people just like you," she said, her voice full of determination. Olivia wrapped an arm around her, her heart swelling with pride. "You already do," she replied. The center became more than just a refuge for those in need. It became a symbol of transformation and resilience. It was a testament to the idea that pain could be turned into something beautiful, that broken hearts could mend and inspire others. Olivia had once felt like a burden to the world, but now she was its light, guiding others through their own darkness. And she wasn't doing it alone. She had Joe and Mary by her side, their strength and love fueling her every step. As the sun set on the first day of the center's opening, Olivia stood outside, taking it all in. The laughter of children, the hum of conversations, and the warmth of the people around her filled the air. Joe and Mary joined her, and together, they watched as the lights inside the mansion glowed like a beacon. "We did it," Joe said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Olivia nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "We did." The return wasn't just about coming back to a place, it was about coming back to herself. Olivia had walked through fire, faced her fears, and emerged on the other side not just as a survivor, but as someone who could inspire others to survive too. She had brought back the elixir of hope, connection, and purpose, and now, she was sharing it with the world.